Hello everyone and welcome back to Abundantly Minimal. My name is Sarah and today we are talking about minimalism at every stage. Now with this in mind, I think minimalism, if I had to define what it means in my life or the benefits of it, it's about living simply, it's about making intentional choices, it's about decluttering what no longer adds value, and it's about saving money. And some of these different actions and habits look different depending on what stage of life we're in. So I wanted to really break those down. Today we'll be walking through 7 different stages of life and walking through a tip or an approach to live simply, make an intentional choice, save money, and declutter at every stage. Now, 2 quick disclaimers before we start. Number 1, I'm 31, so I'm pretty young still, and I haven't personally gone through all of these stages that I'll talk about. So, of course, take that with what you will. I don't have some of the same specific life experience in some of these. However, I have witnessed other loved ones on both my family side and my husband's side go through some of these different challenges or phases of life, and also through my work here with Abundantly Minimal since 2016, I have had a chance to interact with and coach and talk to, hundreds of different people. And so I've kind of pulled some of my ideas and experiences from those interactions. So of course, take it what you will. And the second thing here is I'll be talking through different stages of life, but of course every situation is different. You might not resonate with all 4 tips I give for that particular stage of life, and you may have another opinion. And that's totally fine. You don't need to feel judged or attacked if you are living a different lifestyle. And ultimately, my goal here is to help people live their best lives with less. And if I'm able to do that through my videos, that's awesome. If it doesn't resonate with you, no worries. You can just click away and move on from there. Last thing I'll say before we begin, there are timestamps below if you wish to jump around to only the season of life that is applicable to you at the moment. And I have loosely organized these basically in age chronological order, at least according to societal expectations. But once again, everyone's going through these different stages at their own pace, and some not at all, and that's totally fine. The first stage we'll talk about is when you are moving out for the first time. For many, this might be going to college or a university. For others, it might be they've got out on their own, they've got a job, and they have an apartment that they want to move to. Whatever the case, this can be a really important time to start practicing minimalism right from the get-go. It's prevention, preventing future problems, future decluttering, waste of money, all of those things. This is the foundation. So for our Live Simply tip, I encourage you to start with a hotel mindset first. To embrace this mindset, I want to encourage you to think about if you were to have a one-night stay at a local hotel, what would the essentials be that are there? What types of things are provided? Of course, they might provide some extra stuff that's not really relevant to you, but when we think about the process of moving, sometimes we overcomplicate things and try to, pack way too much or buy way too much. If we think about the basics first and then add on, rather than starting with the maximum list and then pare down later, it can help us have a more streamlined approach. We often don't actually need as much stuff as what people might believe or as different businesses will tell you that you need. For an intentional choice to build onto this, I encourage you to not just get one of those checklists, like all the things you need for college, or whatever people are saying. It's important to really prioritize what matters to you. Think about the items you use on a daily basis. Bring those. Don't go out and buy random stuff that you have never really used before and that doesn't really seem relevant to you, because again, there are going to be so many businesses and companies who want you to spend more money on stuff and buying all these different pieces. And it would be such a shame to buy them and then only have to get rid of them later after you've already spent money. Now, I know those both do tie into saving money, but an additional saving money tip here is to make sure that you prevent that lifestyle creep and keep your apartment or college choice simple. There are so many different luxury apartments and luxury living options out there. And while I think those can totally be beautiful and fun, and for some, I'm sure there is some value in that, I think that can be a really unfortunate way to start off, you being out on your own with a much higher price point and less money saved from doing that and from living there. I also like to think about it, how often will I be in that space? And is it more for the hype than my everyday needs? There have been different YouTube creators I've watched who for a time had these gorgeous high-rise apartments, that had beautiful windows and were just lovely to look at, but they ended up moving out of those spaces because they were just more expensive than they wanted to, spend. So I encourage you to keep it simple, even if there's an option that's really beautiful and exciting looking. In the big picture, I think you'll prefer saving more money now and being able to have additional saved funds for the life's necessities that come up in the future. The decluttering tip for this stage is to start paring down items from your childhood home. Maybe you move everything out with you, or maybe some stuff is staying at home. Out of consideration for your family, if you are keeping other things at home, really start organizing those things and paring them down. You might think that everything that you've got is significant or nostalgic or brings memories, but the truth is you can probably find some things that are just random stuff that was saved for some reason and it's truly no longer going to be valuable to you. And I think it's much better to get that stuff out sooner and not have to be burdened by it later. You're on a new chapter of life now, and not everything from your past needs to come with you or be saved for the future. The next stage of life we'll talk about is when you get your first job or you embark on that career path. To start out with my Live Simply tip, avoid overcomplicating all of the new daily grind aspects, if you will, with the new job. Keep your wardrobe really simple. Maybe you can get by with wearing the same types of outfits on a rotation, so you don't even have to think about it and you don't have to go basically buy a whole new wardrobe with work clothes. Maybe you can think about your routines before work, after work, even routines during the day to help you have a more optimal, efficient, and simple day. As a new job can take up a large chunk of our time, it's important to reflect about how we're using our time both at work and outside of work, especially if we have to bring some work home and do work at home outside of work, which I know when I was a teacher for 5 years, that was definitely something I was doing almost every day. For an intentional choice at this stage, I would encourage you not to make this career or this job part of your identity. Sometimes jobs have an identity attached. Like I mentioned, I was a teacher for 5 years. Teachers often have a strong sense of identity as a teacher. But what happens if we have too much stock placed in this identity of us as this employee for whatever job we're doing, that can prevent us from having strong boundaries to help protect our own mental well-being and to help us know, okay, this is work time, this is personal time. And so if we can have a more, general sense of I am me and I do this job, but this job does not define me, it's going to enable us to take better care of ourselves and protect our well-being and all of the energy and attention that a job can take up, separate from our everyday lives. So I encourage you to also kind of have that mindset in that will, I think, ultimately be a much healthier option in the long run. When it comes to saving money at this stage, I think a great aspect of living simply can be building new healthy habits, such as bringing your own lunch from home each day rather than going out to eat. I know that can be an option, maybe making your own coffee. Another thing that maybe doesn't work for everyone, but I actually carpooled to work. And so that was a great way to save money and also allowed me to have a much lazier morning because I didn't have to drive. So these are all just some examples, but see if there are different habits you can implement that will prevent you from needing to spend additional money as part of this new job. Lastly, from the decluttering perspective at this stage, keep your desk or workspace minimal. We might think that we need to have all these different gadgets and office supplies on our desks, but the truth is that's actually probably not necessary. I know I have found, even though I do have an affinity for school supplies, I found that most of the school supplies I wasn't actually using on a daily basis. And so then it just was stuff that sat out, collected dust. And I know for myself, having a really clean, even completely clean desk, maybe besides a desktop monitor or any other, actual essentials, it just gives you peace of mind. And you can focus on things better because there's not all this other stuff in, your peripheral vision. So I encourage you, keep that desk minimal. Even the drawers as well can be, if there's a bunch of storage in the desk, you probably don't actually need all of it. So if you can keep that minimal, it'll be easier to find things. People might make jokes with you of how you have nothing on your desk, but I find that ultimately it's more worth it to be able to have that situation. The third stage is if you are moving in with a partner or spouse. Maybe you just got married or you've been with someone for a while and are now starting your lives together in one space. And this is both a very exciting time, but also, at least in my life, this was where I realized that I had a clutter problem, and my husband did as well. And we had so much stuff together. It was definitely the most cluttered and chaotic phase of our lives, and it happened right away when we were just kind of getting into all this, getting into our careers as well. So, how do we fix this? My live simply tip is don't turn your home or apartment, whatever it is, into a dumping ground for all of this different stuff. When Jake and I first moved in together back in 2014, we had basically stuff from both of our childhood rooms, stuff we had with us at college. Jake had lived in an apartment before. I was working as an RA, so I was still, getting like free housing in the dorms. So we had all that. Plus we got a lot of wedding gift furniture. We got some used furniture. There was just a big array of random stuff. And while we appreciated having all of the stuff because we didn't have to buy very much, with our own money, and we didn't really have to buy anything new, it was chaotic. There was so much. And so rather than just bringing everything in and thinking, okay, I'll deal with it later, I'll just make sure we have our bases covered, let's reflect about what we actually need and what we actually want before we bring all this stuff in. It's much easier to deal with it before you move than have to deal with it all together. Of course, not everyone has the luxury of time. When we moved out there, Jake finished his summer job on a Friday, and I had to start my teaching job on a Monday, and we had to move across the state. So that was really rushed timing. I would not recommend that. But if you've got the time, let's have a plan ahead of time so we're not just bringing all of this stuff all into one place. To make intentional choices, I encourage you and your partner to go through each spot in your home or in this new place where you're going to be living and reflect about what your ideal vision is. Communication is so huge, especially early on in a relationship and honestly throughout the entire thing. So communicate what your ideal vision is for the space. Of course, you may not be able to achieve this ideal vision yet. A good example for our situation, we have a couch, which honestly, I've talked about many times on the channel. I think it's pretty ugly. It is comfortable, but it was just clearanced, when we got it. It was a gift and very appreciative. We didn't have to buy a new couch, but our dream couch is one of those wraparound couches with a sectional where we can both kind of sprawl out more. And I can't wait to buy one, but it doesn't make sense for us to buy one now here when we know, in a year or so we'll be moving. So that was just an example where it's like, okay, we dealt with it. We have this couch. It is what it is. But having this plan and taking the extra time to communicate up front not only prevents conflict and clutter later, but you'll also maybe be able to create a more optimal space for both of you and not just based on one person's vision or whatever other reason. A saving money tip, this is especially applicable if you are planning to get married or have a wedding in, the near future. And I would recommend not doing a wedding registry. There are definitely pros and cons to a lot of this different stuff. Personally, Jake and I did not do a registry, and there were a few people who still gave us an actual physical gift. However, most people they were very generous to give, cash or checks, and we actually profited from our wedding about $8,000 because we had a pretty budget wedding. It was still nice, but we were definitely, mindful of costs, and that covered paying our rent for the first year, a little bit over the first year of our lives together, which was a huge stress relief as we were starting our career jobs. And so it's pretty old, but I have a video linked where I talk about all the ways we had a very intentional wedding and saved money during that process. Of course, I know this might not be relevant to everyone, but you could still think about how you could apply it to just general gifting instead of wedding gifting that aren't going to clutter up your space and be more aligned to the goals you have. Finally, my decluttering tip for this stage of life would be to tackle those duplicates first. In general, if multiple people are coming together and they have their own set of different items, you may have a lot of duplicates. And while you might be tempted to just save it all, which is what we did at first, and I don't recommend that, instead pare down what is best and get rid of the other stuff. So for instance, we had I think 3 pizza cutters at one point. And so we really didn't need that many. So that was something that was easy to pare down. We didn't do it as soon as we should have, but you can go through your different items. You don't necessarily need 2 sets of everything. Certain things are helpful. I think it's helpful to have 2 sets of towels or 2 sets of sheets so you can wash one and have one while the other one's being washed. But besides those kind of items, let's keep it really simple and prevent having all of these extras that you have to store in your space for who knows how long. The next stage of minimalism I'll talk about is with parenting and how kids and minimalism can interact. Now, I will say I did not include kids as their own section of the stage of life here, just because I think a lot of the minimalism and healthy living habits here, intentional living habits, I should say, come from the parents, I think. So as a parent, you obviously have the greatest influence in your child's life than anyone else does. I remember in doing my education classes, all together in a child's academic career, their teachers can have about 15% impact on who they are as a person. Parents are 60%. So they're the largest piece of that. So it's going to be led by you, which is why I have it here in the parenting section. And of course, the age of your child is also going to affect what minimalism looks like. First, to start out with living simply, we have to acknowledge that less isn't bad. Oftentimes in society, we think more is better in all contexts, but I don't believe that to actually be true. To give a great example of this, I was over with Jake's family, extended family at one point, and there's a sweet girl there. I believe she was maybe 4 or 5 at the time, and there were a lot of family members here, and I felt so bad for her because, people are hanging out, and within a period of about 5 minutes, 4 different people, all adults, were like, "Hey, come over here and play with this toy." And then she'd play for 1 minute and someone else called her, "Oh, over here, come do this instead." And she was jumping between all these different things. And I just felt sad because she was able to focus on one thing if people weren't trying to constantly distract with something else. And so I think what can happen is if kids have too many choices, that can prevent them from being able to focus on whatever the topic is or whatever, the goal is here. In this case, I was just talking about different toys and whatnot. But I don't think that's good mentally to be doing. And I think that can lead to some overstimulation. Keeping things simple and having a much more, curated and meaningful selection of toys, or even having not too many outfits. People get really excited about cute baby clothes, and they're cute, but do they even care when they're really young? Do they even know what they're wearing? So I think we can really shift that. Having less is not a bad thing, and it allows us to be more strategic going forward. To make intentional choices with parenting, I think prioritizing experiences, quality time, and attention can be so much more meaningful than just buying your child something else or bringing in that extra toy or that extra piece of stuff. Quality time, attention, these are true marks of love and giving, and a lot of children would actually prefer this over, random stuff. In the short term, they might get more excited about the stuff, but in the long term, they're not really going to care about that physical item as much as if you were there for them, if you listen to them, if you have that relationship. And that's where if you want to gift something, I think gifting experiences can also be really meaningful. Not only do you avoid bringing new stuff into your life, but you've created a beautiful family memory that you can then enjoy in the future. For saving money, I think secondhand shopping can be amazing with kids. Obviously, there's many different types of secondhand shopping that can take place, whether you're buying something used off Facebook Marketplace or you're going to a consignment shop or a thrift shop. I know personally, I have been very impressed by the selection available. I haven't been looking at these things too in depth, but especially with kids growing so fast, with their clothing, they might hardly wear something before it's too small for them anymore. And especially if you're getting a lot of gifts, you can find really nice quality pieces at secondhand shops without needing to pay the full price for that new item. Likewise, things can easily be passed down between others if you've got friends or siblings or anyone else who maybe no longer needs some of their kid stuff from different ages. Being able to share within the family is a great way to save money and prevent excessive consumption and waste. Finally, my decluttering tip here for parenting is to declutter with each phase of life with the intention of making room for the next phase of life while also prioritizing what's best. Kids generate a lot of stuff. There will be a lot of toys, a lot of school art projects and papers and worksheets and, clothing, all these different things. There's a lot of stuff. And so if we can take the chance to work through items as we go, that will lead to much less stress later on. Here's a good example, I think, with photos. It's so easy to take pictures of, kids are super cute. So it might be very tempting to take lots of photos every single day. So let's say you take about 1,000 photos a year of your kid. I don't know, I bet I'll be doing that, maybe more than that. It would be really ideal to, at the end of each year or given period of time, select your favorite photos. Let's say pick your top 20 photos from the year and have them somewhere special, like maybe a scrapbook or an online special place for them, or even just favorited in your device. At the end of 18 years, if you were taking 1,000 pictures per year, that would be 18,000 photos. And I don't want to sort through 18,000 photos. That sounds exhausting. But if you were just selecting the top 20 per year, you've got a fraction of the photos and it's all the good ones. So it's so much more manageable, and we can apply the same thing to other kid items. The next stage where we can apply a minimalist lens is if we are moving somewhere new. And in this case, I'm talking about moving from somewhere else, and you may also have, your spouse or kids or partner, whoever else, moving with you. So it becomes a little bit more difficult than those earlier stages. I think one of the best, most intentional things we can do from the start, for living simply, is to watch out for lifestyle creep. When you're looking for a home or somewhere else you want to move, it is so tempting to want to bump up that budget or decide, we want that extra room. We want all these different things. And suddenly you are taking on a much larger and maybe more difficult to maintain property. Maybe it's more out of your price range, so it's going to be a bit steeper of a process to pay for it. In these situations, while yes, there can certainly be a time and a place, and it can be fun to get something that's a lot more spacious or whatever the case is. However, this will add labor and challenges later on if we allow ourselves to get a much larger property. Of course, it's all based upon your needs, so it's important to reflect about that ahead of time, but just be careful. Don't let yourself get carried away in the process. To make the most intentional choices possible during this stage, I encourage you to pack up and unpack as slowly as possible in the moving process. When you are packing up, really reflect about each item. Is this worth bringing to the next place, or can I let it go? When you're unpacking, really decide, number one, do I still need this in my new location, and where is the most optimal place to put it? We might be tempted to just unpack quickly and say, okay, these were here at the old place, so let me put them in a similar spot and just get things in where they belong. But let's really reflect. This is the chance to unpack slowly, figure out what we still need, and maybe I was storing it somewhere else, but now I've got a more ideal location that I wouldn't have necessarily thought of if I just put it back somewhere. So really be creative as you're going through this and take your time. A great saving money tip when you move into a new place or you're in the moving process is procrastination. Now, procrastination is not always a good thing, but it can help us save money if there are non-essential household chores or tasks or renovations, furniture buying, any of these things that we're thinking about. Let's say you are moving into a new home and maybe it's a bit larger than before and you've got some extra rooms you might think about filling. You don't actually have to fill them right away. You don't have to actually move forward yet. Take your time. It's okay if there's an empty room to start or multiple empty rooms. if you take your time, you're going to make more intentional purchases and save a lot of money by preventing that waste or those impulses if you procrastinate a bit. You're going to already be kind of frazzled from dealing with what you already have. Why buy a bunch of stuff to add on to it? With home renovations, I know from experience, they're one of my least favorite things to have done. We got our bathroom redone about 2021, and that was my least favorite part of the year by a mile. I did not enjoy having people working in the house at all while I was trying to work and just disrupting routine. So if you want to postpone getting work done on the house, if it's not essential, then by all means, take the time, save up the extra money for it. Maybe you find you don't even need to do it after all. Of course, the trade-off there is you could decide to take care of some of these things before you move in too. Everyone's in a different speed and financial situation, so that's also a way to avoid it if you really dislike it. But I think the procrastination can help us a lot preventing those impulse purchases and making the most for what we have. Sometimes we just need time to figure out how we want to use a space. My decluttering tip here, besides what we've already mentioned with the moving process, is to let go of all of those conditional pieces and don't feel bad. Now, what do I mean when I talk about a conditional piece? Those are items from your past place of residence that were necessary there, but no longer needed. To give a good example of this, in our previous apartment, the kitchen was very small and had almost no counter space. There was so little space that I just couldn't do anything. There wasn't even enough room for my cutting board. So I knew I wasn't going to be motivated to cook that way. And so from IKEA, we bought this little island thing that was movable. And that had a little bit of shelving and also a nice work surface where I cooked, honestly, most of our meals. However, when we moved here, we had a lot more counter space in our kitchen, and I didn't need that island anymore, so we sold it to someone. And that was not too much effort. I didn't have to feel guilty about it, even though it was still objectively a nice thing. Some items you just don't have space for or a need for anymore, and that's fine. Let them go. They were part of that previous location and not necessarily part of your future. The next stage of life can be a bit difficult, but it is very important, and that is helping loved ones declutter and simplify, such as your kids as they grow up or your parents as they're getting older and maybe trying to downsize. In these situations, we can fulfill a very powerful role in supporting this person and overall finding a really positive situation for everyone involved. Of course, every situation is different, but these tips can hopefully make a difference and make the process more pleasant. For our Live Simply tip, it's essential that we create a plan with others. Now, this might sound pretty familiar to when I was talking about moving in with someone. We need to create a plan for the space, and that is definitely true here. Creating a plan with the stuff that we have allows all parties to be on the same page about what's trying to be achieved. It's important to speak honestly, but also gently when we're going through these things. So I know I got a comment recently talking about, that kind of sparked me thinking about this. Their kids have all moved out and they've left all their clutter behind. And when their parent has suggested that let's get rid of this stuff, the kids are like, oh no, that's our memories. And in this particular situation, that did frustrate me a bit that those kids were not willing to get their items and, accept that they're at a place in the life where they're an adult, they can handle that stuff. So that bothered me a little bit. But to use this example, it's important for both parties to communicate about this and say, if I was the parent in this situation, look, I'm so happy to have stored these things for you while you were, figuring yourself out and growing up. But now we need to go through this because you're an adult now. I'm no longer responsible for needing to hold all of this. So these are my goals. Let's talk about your goals for this. Maybe they are wanting to preserve memories. So having a plan, how are we going to work through this? Are we going to tackle, one section of clutter at a time? Will we meet up for a random holiday and maybe the day before or the day after work through some of what's there? Are we going to, however you want to do it? There's lots of different approaches. Likewise, if you're helping a parent declutter, having a plan together of, are they trying to downsize? Is there a certain time period? Do they wish to be moved somewhere smaller, in the next 5 years? Helping them preserve family heirlooms, because if things are just mixed in wherever, you're not going to be able to preserve them. Having this plan is absolutely essential for anything to get accomplished in this, in this front. To make intentional choices at this stage, prioritization matters. I know you might have recently seen my last video where I talked about the non-decluttering prioritization challenge, essentially, minimalism challenge. But the idea here is keeping everything is not actually prioritizing anything. We want to keep the best and declutter the rest. So whatever the situation is, have some prioritization in place. What is the best stuff? What is the meh stuff? And what is the stuff that really people don't care about, which also might be some of the meh stuff as well. The idea here is that no matter whose stuff this is, they probably have favorites. How can we better support the favorites so that they are most protected and most accessible? For our saving money tip for this stage, ultimately, we must remember that everything that we choose to save has a cost. Even if that's not a financial cost, our maintenance, time, and energy cost, and just the storage space in our home, the volume of the item. So nothing's free here. There are fees. And in some cases, people are paying for a more expensive house than they would need to be, or maybe they are even using a storage unit or additional paid storage to make this work. So if we're able to downsize these items together, it's going to make a big difference, not only financially, but also in these other factors too. And for a decluttering tip with this stage, focus on gradual decluttering rather than trying to do it all at once to make it more sustainable. Especially in the case if you're dealing with those who are not really that excited about decluttering, but it's, kind of an essential part of this stage. It's much better to go slow and steady so it will be sustained over a long period of time until the clutter is dealt with, than saying, you know what, my hands, I'm done, take it. I get it out of my house. That's not really a healthy approach either. I totally get the frustration if you've been holding on to clutter for someone else, but we want to make sure that we're sticking back to that plan like I talked about earlier and moving at a natural pace, gradual effort in an intentional way. So if there are lots of different types of things, let's start with one project and work our way through, and then later on we can move on to a different project. The last phase of life where I think minimalism can be very helpful is with the concept of Swedish death cleaning. Now, I did not come up with it. There's a book about it. I feel like it's been a fairly documented topic, but the idea is that you are trying to simplify to prevent your loved ones from having to go through all of your clutter and not really have a plan for it after you're gone. And of course, these are not fun things to think about, but I also do find that it can be very peaceful and it can be helpful to think about it from a legacy standpoint. What do we want our legacy to be when we're gone? A great live simply tip here as we approach this period of life would be to focus on curating what matters most to us. We can start to pare down more things that have no longer added value and really focus on surrounding ourselves with the best of the best, but in a simple way. We don't have to keep all the different odds and ends, especially if they're no longer relevant to us, as our needs change inevitably with every season of life. An intentional choice for this stage is to make sure you've had conversations with other family members and loved ones about legacy pieces of your belongings and what other thoughts are about it, so there's not a lot of questioning and conflict after you're no longer around. With these different belongings, sometimes a lot of conflict can come up with some families, or even just a lack of doing anything. Honestly, the numbers of dumpsters families rent to just throw away all this stuff, I think it's kind of sad what happens. And so having conversations early, and honestly, these conversations can happen, when you're fairly young too. Like Jake and I even talk about this kind of stuff, you never know, just in case. Always important to live each day fully. But the idea is making sure these choices are intentional and that we have a plan about what's going on and other people know what to expect too with these different pieces. And I know even I've heard people putting like Post-it notes with names underneath different belongings just to make it really clear, in the future of, oh, this is going to this person and all of that. From a saving money standpoint, I think downsizing, I know I've mentioned it many times in the video, can be so important because one of our biggest expenses in life is where we live. And you can be paying so much more thousands more every year by being in a place that's really larger than you need, and you've got the extra labor and cost and energy involved in maintaining it. So downsizing can be a really great way to help us do that, and you might even be able to live in a better area or nicer facility with a little bit less square footage than where you were living previously. So that can be a really helpful option here. And from a decluttering perspective at this stage, I like to think about this even at where the stage I'm at in life as well, but the idea of thinking about how our belongings can go on and live a life with someone else. I am quite happy thinking about belongings that I have donated going on and being impactful to someone else. Thinking about the joy someone might experience when they're thrift shopping or secondhand shopping and they see one of these items and it's just what they've been looking for. Or the idea that it becomes one of their favorite pieces and they use it or wear it all the time, even though it might have just been sitting in a drawer. I know I've been very lucky to not experience a lot of death in my life. I've only lost one of my family members, and that was my grandma back in 2014. And it was really sweet because my grandpa was doing an awesome job helping going through different belongings. And at the time, my grandma and I were a similar size of things. And so she had this one random sweater from Aspen, Colorado, and it wasn't like my favorite looking sweater, but for whatever reason, I didn't have anything like it, and I just loved that sweater, and I wore it till there were literally holes in the sleeves. Like, that was my look. Jake called it the grandma sweater because I kind of looked like a grandma in it. But the point is, I don't know if that sweater really meant that much to my grandma. I don't think I really saw her wear it, but I wore that thing till it could not be worn anymore. And that's an example of how I was able to give that item, new life. And I think, all of the belongings that were donated and passed on that she, shared, I think have lived on in different ways to different people. So if we can think of that approach for us as we are, moving through life and deciding if we're going to keep something or not, I just love to think about what other good these belongings can possibly do. This was a long video, longer than I expected, but I'm hopeful that it was helpful in thinking about the different stages and what different approaches you might take at that different stage. Of course, there's also probably merit to applying any of these to any stage as well, and a lot of them do kind of overlap, but I think it's all just part of the process of, like I said at the beginning, trying to live our best lives with less. If this video resonated with you, I've got some other minimalism-inspired videos you can check out here, or subscribe right up here. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.